Hello and welcome to another episode of Driven by Doing podcast. Today we have Bernardo Tirado from New York. Bernardo, welcome to the show.
Hi, I'm super excited to be here with you today. How are you doing?
I'm doing great. Really pleasure talking to you today. And you're a professor, YouTuber, behavioral scientist. There are so many different titles that I can call you upon. So today we are going to learn about your story, and I'm sure like you have great insights to share to our audience who are listening to this. So let's start off with telling about a little bit more about your background, Bernardo. So once you graduate from college, walk us through the journey. Like more than two decades ago, like you
Are
came
we trying to age me on air? That's not nice.
yeah,
But
so
yes, I when I started right out of college and right out of university, I did start. I had a small stint doing some marketing analyst work and didn't really found that to be a good fit. And it was pretty much before I actually graduated. And an opportunity really presented itself when I did graduate because my background was in finance, was to work for the human resources function within American Express. And at the time, they were going from a transformation from personnel to human resource business partners. And a lot of the function that I was doing wasn't necessarily human resources. Interestingly enough, it had to do with merger and acquisitions, looking at businesses, doing the integration work, and a lot of the functionality was really around systems. So looking at data migrations, data hygiene. This is way before, nowadays it's buzzwords of big data, data management. And so became really passionate about understanding human dynamics, not only related to data, but also through the acquisitions where I actually was observing a lot of what do you call it, rejection and reservations about being acquired. And that's what really piqued my interest. So when I went to go for my postgraduate degree, I really wanted to go for psychology. And in my head, it was called business psychology. And clearly, that's not what it's called. But as I started doing research, I started to stumble across different disciplines within psychology, and they're not many. And so it's either known as industrial organizational psychology or social organizational psychology. And one of the famous ones that are out there today is Adam Grant. So if you're familiar with Adam Grant's work, he calls himself an organizational psychologist. And because it's double barreled, we choose one or the other. I mean, there are some nuances. Some of them are more research based, some of them are a bit more practitioner based. And what I found myself doing for the first several years of my career was understanding the human dynamics, or what is now known as human capital space. And a lot of the work I did was around organizational design and working with senior executives as to how to increase sales, how to create a whole sales force within a population or a market that it didn't exist. And what I realized was I was very passionate about being in the business. So I made the leap of actually being in that function of HR into going into re-engineering, which is some people call business transformation. But the focus has been to really look at optimal processes. And that's where I became a Six Sigma Black Belt. And so looking at and hunting for opportunities within the organization was an interesting experience, because up until that point, I was working with senior executives who already had a decision and a mission as to what they wanted to accomplish. In this role, you're given a target. You have to deliver X million dollar of savings, go figure it out. And so it was quite rewarding because it allowed me to talk to people, understand what were the processes that were currently in place, and then redesign them in a way that were either causing it to be efficient from a change in process, or looking at technology as a way to augment some of that work. So some of my very first work was actually doing what now people talk about: automation, robotics, artificial intelligence. Clearly, at that time, it was not clearly evolved as it is at this particular point. But nonetheless, really thinking through logistically as to how to automate. And so my career has always been built about three different areas. It is around the people and the behaviors that we're looking to drive for the organization or for the process. The second is really around technology as to how to streamline processes through technology. And the third is really around the efficiency of processes itself. So, really looking at what exactly are we trying to do? And having done that for several years, I had the pleasure of being able to take a role out in the UK where I was responsible for this very large transformation. And it definitely opened my eyes that I think most people in the US take for granted, which is many times, especially if your headquarters is in the US and you have international presence, we kind of see ourselves, or we don't really think of ourselves actually being in an ivory tower. And so, how we communicate and how we get things done, there tends to be an abundance of resources that people can specialize. But when you leave the US, and by the way, I don't think it's just unique to the US. I think anywhere there's a headquartered company, so let's say it's in the UK or it's in other parts of Europe, wherever the headquarters is, wherever the satellite offices exist, many times what happens is people have to do more with less. So people become generalists because the resources aren't always invested in those particular satellites. And so what I learned was not only about taking into consideration the differences, regional differences in markets, but also how to communicate. Because when you work in corporate, you have a specific way of communicating. But when you start working and actually living in other locations, communications is very different. And after doing that for several years, then I just moved into working at Morgan Stanley, where the majority of my time was also looking at efficiencies. And I actually did move closer to technologies where I was leading a technology team to be responsible for very heavy regulatory work related to Dodd-Frank and EMIR. And EMIR is the European Market Infrastructure Regulation, which is the sister kind of version of Dodd-Frank at the time. And it was fascinating because I'm leading a technology team to implement code, and there's only a small window period that you can do that because, and I'm not going to go into too much proprietary information, but because there's a short window period, you are having to be very precise as to the series of events so that you're not impacting downstream systems, and as a result of that having issues that may result in monetary loss. So these are just some of the experiences that I wound up picking up along the way, and as a result of that, I then moved over into JP Morgan, where I was also responsible for transformation work. But in this instance, because of technology being involved, we worked with artificial intelligence, machine learning, and a whole bunch of other stuff. So, kind of going into a long, detailed, winded experience. But along the way, I wound up picking different certifications as my certified as a Six Sigma Black Belt, certified project management professional, the certified product scrum owner. But all those certifications in my mind have always been frameworks. So I look at it as a toolbox where I'm able to dip into that toolbox, where I'm thinking about what tools will then allow me to create a solution for a problem that exists. And that's the thing that I'm always attracted to. And it sounds a little bit scary, but I love very complex puzzles. And that's one of the main reasons why I've always found myself constantly learning newer methodologies and frameworks to not only understand what's the best way to solve it with the latest technology, but really thinking about the human dynamics, which is one thing that I think many companies and even most technologists don't always take into consideration is the end user. They have a great idea, they think this is what people want, they implement it, and then when it's implemented, the person's like, why did they do that? It was better the way it was before.
That's amazing, Bernardo. You kind of like walked us through the entire journey in a great way, and you had got some great experiences working for several Fortune 500 companies. And is there any framework that you kind of used in your career to kind of make those moves very early on?
What is really important, and it's what I actually work with several of my clients when it comes to coming up with a career strategy, is really thinking about what are you looking to learn. Many times what happens is people just fall into a role right off the start from school and they stay there indefinitely to the point that they hate it. And there are certain factors that may result in why they stay where they are. A part of it could be economics, a part of it be environmental, meaning family obligations. So the ability to take risks may not be there because of the fact that there are certain things that are holding that person accountable for from a financial perspective. But regardless of that, there is something that we can control is basically what do we want to learn, and allowing ourselves that freedom to dream as to what we want to learn, where do we want to be, what do we want to aspire, and what skill sets will allow us to get there is something that has always really driven me to be able to figure out where my next moves are within organizations. The other thing I'd also say is that people tend to get really caught up on applying for jobs. Finding jobs is really about relationships, building relationships, networking with people. That is going to be and has been always been my way of being able to move around. I have yet to apply for a job. All my jobs have been through conversations. I remember, and I won't disclose which company, I went in for just an informal conversation on some work that I was doing with social media. And as a result of that, what was supposed to be an informal conversation turned into an 8-hour interview. And then by the end of the week, I was offered a role that I never applied for. So this example that I'm sharing with you is not unique to me. There are many people who have a lot of talent that know how to build a community around them based on what they're looking to do and what they're looking to learn to be able to get into roles that they aspire to do. So hopefully that answers your question.
Absolutely. I think that's a great way to put it. And a lot of times we hear people saying that the best job that you could get is actually when you're not looking for a job. And you just shared that story, how it happened for you. And I'm sure like a lot of people can easily relate to that story. In fact, like that happened to me in my career so far as well. And how can people create that kind of a mindset? Like you talked about building relationships, which is like the whole key aspect for creating your career that you wanted to become. So how can people learn about building relationships? And you talked about behavioral science, creating those mindset. So what can people do? Is there any key that you have learned in your career that really helped you to build those relationships?
I do. So there are two things that I would share. The first is to look at your career and think of it and envision traffic lights. So if you're thinking of yourself being in the car and you're seeing the traffic lights, if you're in that green state, meaning the green traffic light, chances are you're good with your role, you're happy with it, you're not really bothered by anything. But when you get into that amber stage, it's either because you have mastered the role, you want to learn something new, or something is happening from a dynamic standpoint within the organization that you no longer want to be there. So you have this inkling that you want to make a move. But when you get to the red stage, that is red alert. You want to get out, you don't care how, you just want to move and find a different job. And so you're very spot on that when you're not looking for a job, when you're in that green state, that green mental state, is when you need to be looking for a job. Because for you to be able to find a job through networking, it's not going to happen overnight. It will take 18, 24 months for you to be able to find that role. Also, keep in mind, as you mature in age and as you mature in experience, the roles start to become a lot less available. Why is that? Because the end result is that if you're moving from company to company, you're just assuming that you can be able to make that jump. Chances are within that company, they have already a talent pipeline of juniors that are ready to get promoted. So you're competing with people internally, whether they're seasoned or they're ready to get promoted. And then you're competing against all these other people external like yourself for that role. So I do think that it's a matter of taking stock and understanding the dynamics of finding a job. The second thing that I wanted to share is the fact that it's really about us taking control of our own career. And I know it sounds a lot simpler than it is, but if you really think about it, if you're going to move from country A to country B, you're motivated to make that move. You will make that happen. If you're going to go to university, you're doing all the research as to what does it take to get into the university? What classes do I need to be able to qualify, or what exams do I need? Even your doctor, if you're looking for a doctor, you're going through what do you call it, ZocDoc or some other rating system to say, okay, what doctor do I want to have because I'm changing doctors? Or even restaurants, you use Yelp. So we always do research for all these things that mean a lot to us in our life, but not when it comes to our jobs, because we tend to fall back on that it will just work out and that we will be able to find a job. And the reality is, you may be lucky and you may be able to find that job, but not many people are that fortunate to find jobs relatively easy. So that is why I think it's important to think about your career and what type of strategy do you want to build, to then think about what companies you want to work for. If you ask job seekers and you ask them, what are the top 5 to 15 companies that you want to work for in this lifetime? They probably cannot answer that. They'll give you something flippant like Google, Facebook, blah, 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 because it's the first thing that comes into their head. But they've not really done the true research to figure out, is this really where I want to be? Do I want to work for a large company? Do I want to work for a small company? Do I want to work for a startup? These are questions that people don't tend to ask themselves. And I do think that it's something to think about when you are looking to develop your career. And that's what I do with my clients. I help them really map all of that out, but it's not in isolation, by the way. I map it out with them as to where do they want to be in their career, meaning in their life. If they have family, if they have children, do they want to live in their current location? Do they want to relocate? If they don't have family and they want to go back to school, where do they want to go to school? So there are other external factors that also really drive the decisions related to career, but we don't always think about it, because what we tend to do is we work our butts off to get our degrees, our certifications, and we leave it to faith that the jobs will just happen. And that's just not how things work.
Those are some great tips right there, Bernardo. And now let's talk about, like, a lot of times when we wanted to create something or do something, there is always this voice in the head talks to us, right? Like, no, maybe that's not the right thing to do. Or we think about all the obstacles that can actually prevent us from doing it, right? So taking putting your behavioral science hat, and like, how can people develop this perseverance that can really help them to get to where they wanted to go?
Well, what you're referring to is fear of failure that we don't really recognize. And those seeds of doubt is because we have behaviorally allotted self-worth of who we are to accomplishments, to X level in our life. And that may be related to environmental factors as far as family, parents, expectations. And so one thing that is really important is to really take stock as to what's driving some of these insecurities or some of these seeds of doubt that really limit yourself for you to be able to move forward. Outside of that, then it's a matter of really making a plan and working towards that plan so that you're starting to see progress that's being made. So going back to the example, for instance, of applying for jobs, there are many people that will spend hours applying to 300 jobs and getting super disappointed, frustrated, even depressed. But why do they spend hours applying for jobs? Because they think that's what needs to happen for them to find a job. Instead of, I'm going to allocate 40 hours to actually talking to people and just building a conversation. And networking, to the point that I think you raised earlier, is there's this cloud of, I want to say, of mystery, but it's like this a bad word, and it's not. If you really bring it down to the very basic function of what networking is, everyone has done it. Children do it. If you put children in kindergarten or in school, they will talk to other children. The same thing when you're in university, you'll just talk to somebody because you are organically found in the same location. In this instance, it's the same thing. you're looking to make a connection with somebody, an authentic connection that will organically lead into a friendship, a working professional friendship where people can then help you out and can refer you to others. But that's where the people fall short because they don't approach it as I'm building a relationship. They approach it as this is a very clinical task that I need to do. And I don't like it because now I feel fake. I need to force myself into speaking to somebody that I don't know instead of saying to themselves, how do I befriend this individual? What can I share about myself? And instead of focusing on what I want, let me focus on what they want. So the whole with them, what's in it for me, not really me, but for them. If you approach relationships that way and not have an ask, I'm a firm believer of what comes around goes around. So karma. So if you put something out there and they may not necessarily help you out, something good will come back out of it. It may not happen today, it may not happen tomorrow, but it will happen at some point. So, back to the answer to your question about seeds of doubt that come into your head, it really is a matter of being in tune to yourself. Are you feeling depressed because you're not getting the job, because you're spending hours applying for jobs? Are you upset because things are not going the way you want it to be because your family expects you to be a VP and meanwhile you're still an analyst? And I'm making this up. What are the things that are driving the behavioral angst within you? And only you really will know that answer. And if you can do that self reflection to figure out what's that root cause, then you will be relieved and have you'll have weight off of your shoulders to be able to then act and move forward to be able to get to where you want to be from a career perspective.
That's amazing tip, Bernardo, and thanks for sharing that great insight. How to self-reflect ourselves to be able to find those answers. Now, again, coming back to the next question, how can people create this entrepreneurial mindset? Like you have been your entrepreneurial yourself and worked on so many different projects, and you continue to evolve yourself by learning so much. And how can people create this kind of mindset to be able to thrive in their careers or creating something that they would love to share with the world?
So I am a firm believer that not everyone's meant to be an entrepreneur. So therefore, having an entrepreneurial mindset may not necessarily be for everyone. But that being said, it doesn't mean that people can't try. So I know people who flat off the bat, right off the bat, will say, "Listen, I am not going to be an entrepreneur. It's not for me." But when you ask them why, or what's stopping you, or give it a try, I think that's really where the limitation comes in. So to answer your question, to have an entrepreneurial mindset, one needs and wants to have it, not has to have it. There's a difference between wanting and having to, or having to. So if the person wants to have an entrepreneurial mindset, even if they've never been an entrepreneur, they will have an entrepreneurial mindset. If they feel like they have to, chances are they're just dragging their feet and again checking the checkbox because behaviorally they're not bought into it. So I'm talking about the functional behavior of what we want. When it comes to entrepreneurial mindset, there is a factor there that most people fear and run away from that they're not familiar with, which is true entrepreneurs also have to learn how to sell. They don't have to be the best at selling. They don't have to be the most they don't have to be the most seasoned seller, but they have to know how to sell. And that's what typically trips entrepreneurs up, especially with the first 12 to 24 months. And so I actually work with a lot of corporate or former folks that work in an organization who want to go into entrepreneurship and work with them on their behavioral mindset that will really help them free themselves from having to feel like it is a burden to sell. They have this great concept, but they get stuck in the administration of things because they don't want to go out there. So when you're thinking about entrepreneurial mindset, it's not only about being or acting like an owner within an organization. It's also thinking about, okay, how do I make this better? What can I do to transform this product? And so that's really a lot having to do with allowing yourself to experiment. The most successful entrepreneurs are comfortable with experimentation. And now experimentation, you can equate that to innovation. Innovation, you can equate that to failure. And that's really when you think about those linkages. Innovation is all about failing. Like if you think about what we have here, the phone, this was a flip phone 20 years ago. How many prototypes did it take for this to get to where it is today, and even new ones? Those prototypes are failures. They failed. So if you take and look at failure and flip it as, instead of it being an issue, and looking at it as, this is a learning opportunity. What can I learn to avoid having going through this again? Or what can I learn to tweak this? Then you start to think yourselves and get into that entrepreneurial mindset. So those are just a couple of things that I think help people get into that mentality, but it's more of a journey. It's not just a destination of you just get it done. It's a one and done type of situation. It's really a matter of you deciding where you want to take your learning and what you want to exercise to get you to where you want to be from a professional perspective.
Great insight there, right there, for people who are listening to this, wanting to think about becoming entrepreneurs. It's more about you want to do it rather than somebody pushing you to do it. I think that's when you introspect and learn about yourself, why you wanted to do it. That actually tells you a lot about it. And I mean, you're an expert in so many different domains, and how would you keep pace with all these things that you're doing, Bernardo? What's the secret behind your success?
A lot of it is passion and curiosity for learning. I'm also a very firm believer that we have one life to live. And as cliche as that sounds, I do believe that. And so, because we have one life to live, you want to, at least for myself, I try to make sure that I am doing everything possible to appreciate the now, than worrying about the past and worrying so much about the future. Plan for the future, but live in the now.
That's great tip again. So you actually started your YouTube channel, Career Insights, where you share these great insights that we just learned in the last few minutes. And where can people find you and learn about more about your work, and especially people who wanted to learn about project management? You are an expert in that domain. So where can people find you and learn more about your tips that they can help and take away in their career?
Well, thank you for asking. And it's pretty straightforward. I am known as Professor Tirado pretty much everywhere. So if you're on Instagram, TikTok, YouTube, even Clubhouse. So every single social media, it's basically Professor Tirado, or you just enter my name, Bernardo Tirado, and you will find me there. And if you are an Amazon shopper, I'm also on Amazon Live, which is another experience that I'm really enjoying at this moment, because I'm entering the world of sales. So selling products. Primarily, I focus on author interviews, and also the focus on smart technology products for home and for office. So if you go there as well, it's careerinsights.live.
That's great. It was pleasure learning about your story, and also thanks for sharing wonderful tips, Professor Tirado. And I'm sure a lot of folks who are listening to this definitely wanted to jump on into some of those areas where they can reach out to you and learn more about your work. Is there any final words that you wanted to share with our audience today?
Well, I am super blessed to have had this opportunity to spend some time with you today, and thank you so much for, um, bringing me onto the show and asking certain questions. I don't get asked many questions very often, because I'm the one that's always asking questions. So for me, this was quite a treat. And the one advice that I would give folks that are listening at this particular point in time is something that I also mentioned before. If you are looking to break free from whatever is it that you're experiencing today, and you're dealing with hardships, always know that it will always get better. Again, it may not happen today, it may not happen tomorrow, but it will happen at some point. And follow your dreams. Go and do what you're desiring to do, of course, within limits, but so you be able to fulfill your life as the most as you can. Because again, I always look at it this way: there are always people who have different lives, that wish they had the lives that we all live. So that's pretty much it. Thank you for your time, and I really appreciate it.
That's great. Thanks again for coming on to Driven by Doing podcast. And you are truly driven by doing, and it's been a pleasure talking to you and learning more about your journey. Thank you so much for being on the show.
Thank you. Take care.